thank you so much for listening in or watching this episode of the Powerhouse podcast. I'm Cassie Franklin, Community Engagement Specialist for the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, and your host for this episode of the Powerhouse, where we highlight and feature powerhouses of the mito community. With World Mitochondrial Disease Week coming up on September 16th through the 22nd, we wanted to use this opportunity and platform to focus in on sharing our story, raising awareness, and really amplifying the patient voice. I have three amazing women, true powerhouses, joining me on the podcast today, who each share the very different ways that they and their families are sharing their mito stories. I hope their words will be a source of inspiration for the mito community as we prepare for World Mitochondrial Disease Week 2024. Our first guest today, she's a writer, producer, essayist whose work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, The Today Show, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Entertainment Weekly, and many more. She's the founder of thevitality.com, an aspirational lifestyle platform dedicated to California creatives, and she's the proud mother of two children. Welcome, please, Ms. Lindsay Scharf.
Hi, thanks for having me. I was so happy to hear from you when you reached out.
So, Lindsay, just to start, if you want to, please share your story, your family's experience with mitochondrial disease.
So, like most people, I had never heard of mitochondrial disease prior to my daughter being born, and we were in the hospital and she was 4 months old, and there'd just been a series of strange symptoms, and no one had answers. I mean, my pediatrician didn't say anything so much as she sent us to the children's hospital for a few days of what we were told would be observation. And what we were told would be 3 to 5 days turned into 2 months in the hospital with Evan, where our lives forever changed. So we'd never heard of mitochondrial disease. It wasn't something we were familiar with. I'll just never forget seeing those words written on the marker board. And we chose not to do a deep dive then because it wouldn't have helped any. But the geneticist there just sort of blurted out that our daughter would never walk, never talk, that she might develop seizures, that she might lose her eyesight. And I don't mean to, especially if this audience is a mito audience, I don't want to ever scare anyone because that's obviously really daunting information, but that is what we were told. And obviously mitochondrial disease looks different for everybody, and the level of how extreme the experience can be differs from person to person. So we found ourselves in the most extreme of circumstances, essentially. And obviously it was a lot of information to take in. And they referred us out. They suspected she had a mitochondrial disease, but they didn't have enough conclusive information because the exome sequence didn't turn anything up, at least not as far as the more common mitochondrial diseases. And so they referred us out to Rady's Children's Hospital. They have a genomic institute, and they worked in tandem with the Undiagnosed Disease Network. And it was those two organizations, but primarily Rady's. It took, I want to say 2 years, but we finally got an official diagnosis for Evan. Her official diagnosis is called CARS, KARS. I'm sure the stats have changed since then, but at the time, we were told she was one of 27 children in the world to ever have her specific diagnosis. And I believe we were one of 16 families, I want to say at the time. And obviously I would imagine because of technology, there had been people who came before Evan. But technology now allows them to actually diagnose and get that diagnosis, which the diagnosis didn't necessarily help specifically with medical care, because as you know, there are no FDA approved treatments available for those impacted by mitochondrial disease. It's essentially a series of over-the-counter vitamins, which are not covered. I'm not sure across the country how that works, but I can tell you here in California, none of that is covered. All is out of pocket. So it's one of the many, many battles that mito families know from. But I will say getting the diagnosis was helpful in terms of, getting other treatments that Evan very much needed, whether it was OT, PT. In her case, she was also born deaf. And so she had a cochlear implant surgery, which gave her the ability to hear. Greatest decision we made, to be honest. And I say that because, I understand that within the deaf and hard of hearing community, cochlear implants can be, it's a tricky topic. But for Evan, because she had such limited abilities, it opened up her world doing that cochlear implant. And I also want to mention that not the geneticist at Rady's, but at another hospital, when we asked if her diagnosis, her umbrella diagnosis, would preclude her from getting a cochlear implant surgery, he literally looked at us and said, well, if it's going to make you feel better. And that was the the feedback we got from him, because it's an elective surgery. But literally for us, it opened up her world. She had such a love of music, a love of books. I mean, and that's the thing too. I want to make sure, like, I know we're talking about Mito disease, but I don't, people are not their diagnosis. And I think that's really important to stress. And so I want to take a minute, if it's okay, to also talk about what an incredible spirit Evan was. And I think, especially if we're going to be talking about storytelling, that's what you have to focus on. You have to focus on the person, not the diagnosis, because when someone falls in love with a person, you want to learn more. You naturally want to learn more, and you want to better understand, and you're rooting for them. So Evan, she made it to 3.5 years of age. And this child went through more than most adults do in their lifetime, between surgeries and in and out of the hospital. And it just, the quality of life obviously wouldn't be ideal. But she smiled between every moment of struggle. And that tells you so much about this spirit. I'm not religious, so when I say spirit, I just mean like the actual spirit inside. Like, this kid was unlike anyone I've ever met. She forced presence just by existing. Like, when you sat with her, you were present, because she also was, for a nonverbal child, was very verbal. She knew how, with just the look of her eye or a certain sound, she let you know if she was happy or if she was unhappy. And so she would essentially call you out if you weren't present at all times with her. But she was just an incredible person. And everyone who ever encountered Evan, I truly believe, like, their lives were changed. I know that sounds like a lot, and that's and of course, I, as the parent, I'm going to want to believe that, but I know I hear it all the time from people. And a lot of people, most people, didn't meet Evan. They met her through social media, I guess, in a way, or through the storytelling. So I'm doing a lot of talking. I want to let you kind of jump in with, how do you want to steer it?
Yeah, no, I what touched me just now, listening to your story, listening to Evan's story. I was following her story and have followed her story over social media, even, since her passing. And I was just looking at it the other day, and the fact that she loved music so much, and that was such an important part of her, and an important part of her story, important part of her personality. What you said about the cochlear implant, like, looking at her social media, would have had no idea. And if you had made a different choice, like, what a different story that would have been.
Completely. And I will say too, I mean, we understood that any surgery you put, these are medically fragile children. We understood everything is a risk, everything. But we just felt so strongly that this would be not improving our quality of life, which is how we were made to feel by this other geneticist, but improving her quality of life. This kid had so much joy in her life. And I think it also taught us, like, there is nothing simple about joy. Some people make it more complicated. Sorry, I'm like some people make joy more complicated than it actually is. And I think we do that to ourselves. Joy, literally for her, it was as simple as a song and really being present with that song or that book. And when you observe that in somebody else, when we observed that in Evan, like, it's hard not to apply that to your own life, because everyone should apply that to their lives. It's just easier said than done, obviously. But no, I mean, that cochlear implant completely changed her life, and then as a result changed our lives. Like, we didn't even know. It takes time to reveal if the impact it had, because the brain has to still make sense of it. I won't get into all the minutia of it all, but we were warned many things. And so it wasn't until it was over the holidays, and we were at the Grove in Los Angeles, and there were a bunch of like trumpeters and musicians. They were playing Christmas songs, and all of a sudden she came alive, like, and it became so clear. Like, my husband and I looked at each other. She hears. Like, we suspected it because we sing to her, but this was the first time we really saw that joy, and she just came alive more and more with time and with that additional ability.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me about Evan's favorite song.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so all things John Mayer, but the key song, one of the songs that we put her to bed with every night, because we had a whole routine, and my husband wound up learning to play the guitar a little bit, just enough to play for Evan, basically. But Free Fallin', so Free Fallin' is not John Mayer's song. It was a cover that he did of Tom Petty's song, and so that kind of became like our song. And what's really sweet is I'm beyond grateful, and that's a whole other story for another day, but I have a son, Reed, who we are just with that diagnosis as well. We were able to go down the path of IVF, and they created a test. That's a whole other journey, a whole other conversation for another day. But Reed, when Free Fallin' comes on the radio, he's 2.5, he'll say Evan's song. And then I know, thank you. And he said, and Reed's song too now. And that's what's cool too, to sort of connect her music with his music. And he has some songs that he's like, Reed's song. And that's so beautiful too, because he, it's his own path and his own life. But I love that music in a way is also storytelling, and is sort of a connective tissue between Evan and Reed. And our families, I mean, I will say too, it's wild. I listen to the radio. It's just good old fashioned radio, not, Spotify or anything like that. And it's incredible to me every single time I'm in the car, Free Fallin' plays, and it's Tom Petty's version. I'll take it. But it's really, yeah. So
it's connecting them. It'll always be a connection for them too. And that's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. Sometimes I like to believe that, that's how she's communicating. That's how we communicated here on Earth, was through music. And I choose to believe that, maybe that's what's happening, because it happens a lot, for a song that's from years ago. So, yeah.
That is awesome. You mentioned the diagnostic journey for Evan for you all took 2 years. Can you just talk a little bit about how having the diagnosis, how that made you feel as a family? I mean, everybody receives that information differently. It can be so hard and scary, and but tell me a little bit about your experience and Evan's experience. Yeah,
receiving the diagnosis.
Yeah.
So, it was bittersweet receiving that diagnosis. It's what they suspected based on symptoms. They kept saying a suspected mitochondrial disease, suspected. It didn't change, unfortunately, the quality of treatment or quality of life, because everything really was stacked up against us and against Evan. But it did give us a sense of relief in a way too, to finally be able to sort of name what was happening. And again, with future family planning, that was a big, piece of information because we weren't going to personally go back down that road unless we understood what was happening conclusively. So no, the diagnosis was, you need a diagnosis. I mean, to live, we were already living in the unknown. And so much, even being told, well, we were told one of the stats was children with this specific CARS, KARS, with this specific diagnosis, kids live between the ages of 16 months to 4 years of age. So even being given that information, you don't know. You still don't know. We lived in just, everyone in life lives in the unknown. They just choose not to see it that way because it's too hard to acknowledge that. But we really learn to embrace that best you can. So at least this gave us a piece of something known. While living in the unknown, this was known. Now we knew conclusively, we are being told she has KARS. So it may be peace of mind, but not beyond that. But it was still, I mean, it was everything. I'm not articulating this well, but like, you need that diagnosis. And we were extremely grateful to Radies and UDN for getting that diagnosis for us. I'm very well aware of how lucky we were.
I'm glad that it was as hard as it is to receive, that it was like you said, a peace of mind, and it sounds like had an impact on your future with Reed.
Completely in every way. We are forever grateful for that diagnosis. It's not lost on us how incredibly lucky we truly are in every way. I mean, even right down to Evan, we talk, like, both of them are the greatest gifts I've ever been given. Like, obviously we wish that Evan's path could have been different. I would obviously never want that path for her, but that is the path she found herself on, and we found ourselves on with her. And my God, there's so much gratitude with the time I think that's the other thing. We shifted our perspective really quickly upon learning. It's not that we gave into the circumstances. It's that I understood that I didn't want the circumstances stealing time away from us. I didn't want the circumstances stealing my joy. So I wanted to just sort of give in to Evan's reality throughout the milestones, live in her present, whatever that looks like, however much time we have with her. And so I think because I was truly present with her during that time, I don't look back and have regrets, and I'm able to view it as just immense gratitude for the time that we had together.
I want you to know, when I've read your essays and following Evan's story, and when I look at social media and follow your story on social media, that's what's reflected back.
Aww.
Is so much joy and living in the moment and gratitude. And it's just a really beautiful story. So our audience, you may have read Lindsay's essays in Variety, LA Times, and People when has written about her daughter, Evan Francis, and mitochondrial disease. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about, you have this kind of professional platform, and you've chosen to be really personally vulnerable and share your family's journey. So what has that been like, and what has that meant to you?
It has meant everything, because I was not an essay. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. I've always believed in telling stories that matter. Not to say that my story didn't matter, but like, if there's nothing, I don't believe in speaking for the sake of speaking. You speak if you have something to say. And so I always I was in service of other people's stories. I wanted to tell their stories. And then when things unfolded with us, I'm not somebody, to each their own. If it's healing for you to put things out in real time, do that. If that is what feels good for you, do that. That for me, I mean, I was just trying to make sense of what was to survive. I didn't know if I would ever necessarily share when we were in the thick of it. I did not know if I would share Evan's story. I didn't know how to share her story. And what happened, what changed things was the pandemic happened. I mean, people in our lives closest to us knew what was going on. And I was sharing Evan on social media just because who doesn't want to share their daughter, even though I knew people might have some questions. There were, if you looked closely enough, like, yes, she's adorable. But if you look closely enough, you knew something was going on. You didn't necessarily know what, and people aren't going to feel comfortable asking. And so when the pandemic happened, I couldn't sleep one night because I suddenly realized, oh, people have no idea. I mean, it's not like I knew what a pandemic, but I knew what it felt like to have your life forever changed and to the unknown, all of that. And so literally I couldn't sleep, and I just sat down to write, as I always do. I don't always share, but I wrote. And then I was working very regularly with the LA Times at that time. And so I turned to my editor and I shared it with him because they were working on something. I also knew that timing wise, it would fit in with what they were working on. So I said, I wrote this thing. What do you think? And I was terrified because, the world is you would hope that nobody would, when you're putting yourself out there in that way, you just don't know what you're going to get. The internet is a scary place. So I was nervous, but it was life-changing. As everything with Evan was life-changing, but this was another layer of life-changing because now I felt very supported. I was blown away by how many people I heard from. Other families, it's in the Mito community. The broader thing, the rare disease community. I mean, it's the same scary path, even if, the symptoms differ and the diagnosis differs, but the unknown is the same. So being in touch with other families was huge. I mean, I was already in touch a little bit here and there, but to just feel so seen was huge. To feel like my daughter was being seen was huge. I suddenly feel like it just, to not have this, Evan was never a secret. The diagnosis was never, and we didn't have a diagnosis actually at that point then. It was still the umbrella diagnosis. But to have it out there so that anyone who wants to know from it can read about it. And if you want to ask me questions, I'm happy to answer questions. But like, the more beautiful thing is, in a way, people, then they knew, and so they're following her journey. But really, what we shared of Evan was focused on just Evan, like music and the joy. And she was just truly was a special spirit. So I think like the two things in tandem. But I'm so grateful. And even though, yes, I'm a professional writer and I have this platform, it's not easy to get these things published. I mean, it's extremely, ask any professional essayist. And I would never dare call myself, I'm not I write essays. I use the term essayist because I've now written more than a handful, but I only ever write something if it serves a greater purpose. My more recent piece for people, yes, it gave me the ability to shine a light on Evan. But for me, that one was focused on IVF just because people are trying to dismantle it. And that's a whole other conversation for another day. But, for me, if I write something personal, it has to serve a greater purpose.
That's such important feedback. We've got World Mitochondrial Disease Week coming up in September, the 16th through the 22nd. So, I mean, what you just said about speak if you have something to say. I just hope all of our families and the whole Mito community is listening to your words, and that they're galvanized by them, because they do have such an important story to share and such important things to say. And I hope that they speak. I hope that they raise their voices.
Yes. Yes. I whatever that means or looks like for you. I mean, like in Evan's case, it's really interesting too. Like I say often, because it's just true, that I feel like I didn't find my voice until Evan, because Evan was nonverbal. So I had to be her voice in hospital rooms and doctor's offices. I was her voice. I was her person. And so, I think but also only if it feels good for you. I don't think you shouldn't feel like you have have to either. I think it's all about what is going to be healing for you, what's helpful for you. That looks different for everybody. But no, never, I would say never be afraid of speaking if it's going to feel good and it's going to help you, do it. And it doesn't matter how many people are or aren't listening, because, I think that's the one thing too that I've had to, I think that first piece, the response was just overwhelming, and you feel so seen. Can't get attached to that either. Like, the act of just sharing your story is enough. Sharing your kiddo's story is enough. So yeah, I don't know. I guess not being attached to, because I also think, and I say this because we live in a time where everyone's trying to go viral on social media, and
Oh,
and
yes.
it should never, I don't know. That's not a goal to have. Just do what feels good for you. And, yeah, I think that should be enough.
That's such important and good advice to hear, because I feel like a lot of times the mitochondrial disease community, I mean, I've been at this for years, and sometimes you feel like you're shouting into the void and that nobody wants to listen. And
Yep.
so it's just it sometimes it's enough
It
for
has
it
to
to be
be enough.
said.
It
Yeah.
has to be enough, because you can't be attached. I mean, it's hard, because I think, everyone's shouting into the ether, and everyone has very valid reasons to be shouting into the ether. I mean, everyone's story truly matters. And everybody wants to be heard. I think, obviously at the end of the day, everybody wants to be seen and heard. That's why they share on social media. That's why you write an essay. That's why you put it out there. But I think, I say this because it's something that, I have to be aware of too. And so I put it out there for anyone else who decides to share their story. You can't be attached to the outcome of that either. I mean, yeah, sharing it is enough, and like, be proud of yourself for sharing, because that is truly enough. Yeah.
Right.
Especially this younger generation, I feel like it's so important to, everyone's so attached to numbers and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, talk to us a little bit about other ways to share your story. You're published. You have an amazing social media presence. What are some things that maybe you or other people in your family, what are they doing to share Evan's story?
Our family was inspired in so many ways, because my husband, Michael, was the biggest part of Team Evan alongside me. And he was inspired to learn to play guitar. I mean, he was inspired in every way. Michael was Evan's voice as much as I was. And every essay I ever wrote, words can only get attention as much as the photos. And so all of the photos were Michael. He's a photographer. And no, they were just family photos. It's not like we took them for these essays. We found that we obviously knew we wanted to capture as much of Evan to have her forever. But also, I think it became a real sense of joy getting dressed and dressing her up and feeling kind of fancy and doing photos with Michael. So I feel like we were all really inspired differently. And yes, Michael and Evan had a bond that was beyond what any of us did, if I'm being honest. That's just the truth. Like, I would love to say this little girl adored me, and she did. I'm her mom. She eventually is a nonverbal little girl. She understood everything. It was just not having the physical ability. She got the word mom out on a number of occasions. So no, she loved her mom, but she loved her dad. The way this girl looked at him was unlike anything I've ever seen. I rewatched videos of, she just idolized him. It's been incredible, because I think she's impacted all of us so differently. For starters, my mom, who when she was with Evan, she lives in Florida, but she'd come out here so often. I mean, literally, we saw her all the time. She would be with Evan in our backyard looking up at this beautiful tree that Evan and I also would all just sit and look up at together. And so when Evan passed away, it like the words just came to her, and I have the book. My mom wrote a book inspired by her. It was called Evan Francis and the Grand Old Tree, but then she changed it just to kind of give it a life of its own. It's what she imagined Evan thinking and like the life that she could have had, and it's a really beautiful, joyful children's book. And a portion of the profit goes toward Mito organizations, various ones like UMDF being one of them, of course. So piperjoybook.com. So that's how my mom was inspired. My brother, my brother, unbeknownst to me, when all this was going on, he had turned to a book called Geography of Bliss, a book he had read years earlier. And it just really resonated. So he returned to it, and he works in the world of documentary. And so he decided to option that book and created a series, and Rainn Wilson attached to it. So it's called Rainn Wilson and the Geography of Bliss. And that was literally inspired by my brother going on his own journey of exploring what does happiness mean and what does happiness look like. And it actually means a lot of things, you can work on it for years and nothing comes of it. In this case, they actually shot the series, and it aired on Peacock. I believe it's going to a different network, but I'll find out. But Evan's beautiful face appears at the very end of every single episode. Oftentimes, most of the time, I genuinely am at a loss for words. Like, I guess it hadn't even occurred to me, like, that's right. That's how my brother was inspired. My sister, unbeknownst to me, learned she was a dancer growing up. She learned choreography and danced to John Mayer's Free Fallin' version of Free Fallin' at like a faculty. She's a occupational therapist, ironically, but across the country. So we didn't get to work with her, but so she did a dance to that was incredible. Evan's on my mind, obviously, all the time. She did teach me to be as present as possible. So I do give into Reed's joy and his reality, and I'm there and present with him too. But obviously, Evan is always on my mind. So I'm always looking for new ways to honor her. In the immediate aftermath, something I did was I asked a friend of mine, she has a company called EF Collection. I had her make a ring for myself and my sisters that looked like Evan's sunglasses. And then she very kindly asked if she now offers them if somebody wants to buy it. And then a portion of the proceeds goes toward Rady's Children's Hospital.
It's beautiful.
Through her organization, Angels for Austin, because unfortunately she lost her son to a rare disease, not Mito. And that's how we connected. I know that, honestly, I hadn't thought about so many of these things until having this conversation with you, because I think they've each been a part of the journey along the way. And, obviously one day I would love to, I just want to keep finding new ways to tell Evan's story, Yeah,
when can we expect the book? No,
one day, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of you to ask, and I would love that. I just, like everything else, I just want to do it in the right way. Mm-hmm. Whatever that means, I don't know. Right now I'm very much still, listen, I'll spend the rest of my life healing. I'll spend the rest of my life finding new ways to keep Evan's memory out there. But yeah, I would love to obviously write a book one day. I just want to find the right way to do it and the right people to do it with. I don't know from that world, even though yes, I'm a writer. That's a whole other world, the lit world. So we'll see one day.
Well, something to look forward to.
Yeah, thank you. For me too. I mean, it'll be hard to obviously sit down and do that deep dive, but something I say to my therapist all the time is I'm so afraid of forgetting. Like, I don't want to forget any of it. Even if I think, the memory can only take so much. And so it yes, not to say erases, but it can only hold on to so much information. And I am afraid I don't want to forget a single detail, even the hard stuff. I don't want to forget it, because yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm now treating this like a therapy session.
I'm terrible for that. I apologize. It's I do these interviews at our conferences, and I joke, and it's not even a joke. It's terrible. I, I we always end up crying. And it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street. There's just so much trauma attached to the journey, unfortunately,
Of course. No, I mean, like, you can sugarcoat it all day. But there's so much trauma. I didn't even know we were experiencing trauma when it was happening. A doctor had to say to me, "You're experiencing trauma right now, da da da, whatever." And I didn't even understand the word she was. It takes a lifetime to process this stuff. So no, there is a lot of trauma attached to all of it. But I think and again, for everyone, it's different. For me, it's been also recognizing that within all of that, there was an extreme joy that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. It was a sense of joy that you couldn't understand any other way. And so I think, it's just understanding for me that the two went hand in hand. It was two extremes, like the highest of highs with Evan and also the lowest of lows, and just understanding that the two were part of the equation. Yeah.
So tell us how we can find Evan's story. If you're listening to this Powerhouse podcast, where can we go? We've mentioned it a lot on it's on social media, but how do we find Evan on social media?
How do we find Evan on social media? Right. So also, and this was just something fun we did. My husband, Evanfluencer, she has an Instagram handle that I'm still trying to navigate what to do with it. But in the most immediate, like, if you want to see Miss Evan, we call her Miss Evan. Evanfluencer is her Instagram account. And that literally just started. My husband thought it was a cute name, and he started I just sort of took it over, and it was just always cute pictures of Evan. We never mentioned mitochondrial disease until that time, until she passed. But people knew. I mean, if you knew me, and it was essentially it's people who knew me and know our family, and so they just wanted to see sweet photos of her. I mean, she's on my account too, obviously, but it was inspirational words of wisdom from whoever. I mean, I feel like there was a J-Lo quote on there, or like a Chanel, like, wear red lipstick and attack. Like, I don't know, it just was meant to be a place of joy. So that's a good place to sort of be introduced to Evan. And then my account, it's how I'm social media is a tricky beast because it's hard to navigate. Like, I have two very different realities happening at the same time. I'm grateful for my path with Reed, my life with Evan, like they exist like this. And he met his sister, which was incredible. She passed away when he was 4 months old. But forever, I mean, beyond grateful they had a chance to meet. And so anyway, yeah, my essays, I link all that stuff up on my Instagram. Like, I wouldn't even know where to send people other than there right now, because that's just kind of how I exist. People, a lot of times, I love when people say, like, you're so brave for writing this or that. And I don't see that as brave at all. Writing is healing. The brave part is living it. And what I would say to the Mito community is they are living it. They are living it every single day. They are fighting every single day. I know those battles, whether it's with insurance, whether it's with services, whether it's with equipment you need. Whether it was with, in our case, LAUSD, or, there are just, the battles are nonstop, on top of just trying to have a sense of day-to-day joy, whatever that looks like for each person. So really all I can say is, like, you're doing it and you're doing great, and do what you can to find joy in between the battles. That's what I would say. But, like, the bravery is in the living it, and you're doing it. And I just have love for everybody, because I've been there, we've been there, and I get it.
Oh gosh, Lindsay, I appreciate you so much for for joining us today on the Powerhouse. I think that you've done a magnificent job for us this segment of sharing your story and giving people such important just things to think about as they prepare for Mitochondrial Disease Week. But it's funny, it's 1 week of the year, but it's an everyday. So
it's every day. It's every day. I mean, I get why it's 1 week of the year because, we're trying to garner attention in the same way that every, platform has their messaging, but it's every day and everyone's doing it. So I just have love for everybody.
Thank you so much for
And
joining.
thank you for letting me share and do too much talking. Thank you for letting me share Evan's story. It means a lot. It really means a lot.
A huge thank you once again to Lindsay for sharing Miss Evan's story, her story, and their family story on the Powerhouse. We're going to take a quick break here, but stay with us for our next Powerhouse guest. Thank you for watching the Powerhouse podcast. Are you looking for answers and do you think it might be Mito? We are here to help. The United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation provides access to genetic testing to those suspected of having mitochondrial disease through our UMDF no-cost genetic testing program, which is hosted in partnership with Probably Genetic. Talk to your doctor about this opportunity and find more info at www.umdf.org/genetic testing. Now, let's get you back to the Powerhouse. Today we have with us, and I'm so excited to bring her back again, Linda. She's a volunteer with UMDF for more than 20 years. She has done everything from Energy for Life Walk co-chairing to support group leadership. She's an advocate. She raises awareness throughout her region. She's from Western New York, and I'm pleased to have with us today on the Powerhouse podcast, Linda Ramsey, our 2024 Energy Award winner.
Hi,
welcome, Linda.
Thank you for having me.
And tell us a little bit about, for those in our community or those of our listeners that might not already know you, tell us a little bit about your connection to mitochondrial disease really quickly.
Sure. It is a pretty quick story because back in 1996, we didn't know a whole lot. My son was born with developmental delays. He wasn't thriving. In 1996, he passed away in 1997. And the doctors at the time just said, we think he has a mitochondrial disease. He went through 9 months of a lot of grueling tests because they didn't know any better. They didn't really know back then what to look for. There wasn't the testing that there is now. So started when he passed away, just looking into mitochondrial disease myself, whatever was available, back in 1997 and 1998, what was available, what you could find, and basically never stopped.
And started you on a decades-long journey with the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, and I said quick bio, but like it's such an important. It's why you're here, and why you've been working so hard the last 25 plus years. And so tell us a little bit about how you've been raising awareness in your area. What have you been doing? And how has that changed in maybe?
Well, yes, just to say, not for nothing. We can't discount technology at the time as well. So again, back in 1996, when UMDF was just starting and all of the other patient advocacy groups were starting, and the internet was really starting to explode, and we could share information nationally and internationally. That was a game changer right there. But also in the same time, this has been an incredible 3 decades of medical advances. The research in medicine and in medical technologies and testing and just research, what we have found linked to mitochondrial disease is also at the same time, exploded. So I kind of had that in my favor. So UMDF was formed, able to start raising awareness and start supporting others, as well as raising obviously funds for research. So through that avenue, we were all able to share information, support researchers to learn more about mitochondrial disease. And since then, too, how I've been able to kind of connect to other people is the link that researchers have found, again, that we didn't know way back then, decades ago, but now we do, the link to more common diseases that people know about, the link to cardiovascular disease, the link to diabetes, the link to Parkinson's, that is mitochondrial function based, based on mitochondrial function. And that is sort of a kind of a pathway in. People have heard of people haven't heard of mitochondrial disease, but they've certainly heard of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And so when you start mentioning that research into mitochondrial function is really research into all of these much more common illnesses and diseases, then people start listening a little bit more. So that was sort of a kind of an inroads sometimes to how I reached out to local newspapers and local churches. And you might want to read up on this because somebody might be affected by this cancer or this autoimmune disease. Well, that has its basis in mitochondrial function. And that gets people to start listening a little bit more.
So you mentioned reaching out to local community groups and churches. What sort of opportunities have you had? And I know a little bit, but I want you to talk a little bit more about that.
So I was, I live in a fairly small town. I happen to know a couple people at the local newspaper, and I reached out to them back in 2011, I guess, when the Western New York Mito group or Western New York Mito support group was formed. And we started doing the Energy for Life walks. So that obviously the signature fundraising event, having that name behind it, we were able to I was able to contact them and ask, would you mind advertising this? But the paper, the way they do it, they don't just advertise the walk, they actually would do a story on it. And so they did a number of stories, and then local churches and a Girl Scout group and a Boy Scout group, Lions Club, things like that would just reach out to me and say, hey, I read about this. Would you come speak to our group? And I said, of course I would. And happy to spread awareness. That's, half the mission as part of obviously raising funds for research, but spreading awareness is the other part of the mission that's just been a joy. There were two opportunities as well that the UMDF reached out to me to represent them in Western New York. And they were really fun because they were both at colleges. One was in Niagara Falls and the other was at SUNY Geneseo. And they were both leadership groups and interested students going off to college. And I guess that really gave me a lot of energy and hope for the next generation too of researchers and scientists, because you don't know in this room of 200 people, 200 students, what one of these is going to hear. Oh, mitochondrial disease. Oh, well, I loved biology and I remember hearing about mitochondria in biology. Maybe I'll study that in college. And then who knows, maybe I'll go on to, research that even further, and then who knows what that's going to blossom into. And all these students were so interested, as well as their teachers. So I have to say those two opportunities were a lot of fun. And another one most recently that we just did, I just did with two other UMDF ambassadors. We spoke to a genetics counseling, it's a master's in genetics counseling class in British Columbia, obviously via Zoom. But that was really fun too, because they could hear from us the other side of it. And they acknowledged that, we're so caught up in the verbiage and, they're so caught up in learning all about how to help read genetic testing and how to help them, how to look at it from the scientific end. They could actually hear from us on the patient side. Here's what we want to hear as families with, whether you are an affected adult or you have a child with a diagnosed, or you're presenting a diagnosis of mitochondrial disease, what that's like to hear. Most people have not heard of this. They haven't heard of all the words behind it either. And it can be very scary. And the first thing that people always do, we call it Dr. Google. They go on Dr. Google. And that's a very frightening place when you're first diagnosed, because you can really hear some scary things. So it was really, really fun being able to connect with that class and being able to kind of shed some light on what it's like from our side, to that genetics counseling class. And I hope that we can do more of that.
Oh, incredibly valuable opportunity to be able, like you said, to just share a patient perspective with this group of incoming, genetic counselors. I mean, how valuable that's going to be when they are sitting in their position and potentially counseling somebody with a genetic mitochondrial disease.
Delivering that news is really, it's hard. Again, because people it's unknown, and that's scary. And when you get that, you don't even know how to, it's hard to remember even what it is. It's hard to remember all the terms. These are new terms that you haven't heard before. And it's also, let's say it's your child, and it's difficult. So that was a great opportunity.
They've made that human connection though now with you and the other support ambassadors that were there speaking with them. Thank you for that, for sharing your story in so many different venues. I love that you have really moved the needle in your local community, talking just grassroots, putting out a newspaper article that then everybody's contacting you. Hi, Linda, come in and talk to our Girl Scouts.
It's really neat. It really is neat. It's been a great way to reach people, and you never know what that's going to blossom into for anybody.
Absolutely. You're planting seeds, Linda. For the last, 25, 30 years, you've been planting seeds, and you never know what that, like you said, is going to blossom into. What obstacles or hurdles have you had to overcome in all of these years? Have you ever had a moment where you're like, oh, that's going to be really tough. I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that, or how do I go about this?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that I don't feel comfortable doing it, but definitely one of the obstacles that we have here, and I'm assuming that this is all over, but especially here in Western New York, we are known, by the way, as the city of good neighbors, and it's for a reason. We really do look out for each other. Any given weekend, you're going to find 20 or 30 fundraisers for different organizations, different church groups, different causes, a family in dire straits, animals. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And again, I've lived here for so long. I don't know if that's what it's like across the country.
Right.
But that's an obstacle, because on our many times for the Energy for Life walk in Western New York, ours is the same Sunday as the Alzheimer's walk. The day before is the Bosom Buddies walk for breast cancer. We overlap with so many other fundraising walks that same weekend. And then the weekend before, there are 10 different walks. The weekend before that, there are 10 different, and also organizations and businesses always being asked to support. So that is also a problem as well. I mean, I wouldn't say problem, but that's an obstacle, because they are also being asked all the time. Businesses are being asked to sponsor an event, just like the EFL that we ask. We go to businesses and ask them to sponsor at different levels. They have just been asked by who knows how many other organizations or families, having their own fundraiser, to sponsor as well. And there's so much. So there's a lot of almost competition.
Right.
So that is definitely a challenge. It's kind of an obstacle when we come to the fundraising piece of our Energy for Life walks.
What do you think? In what ways do you think have you crossed that hurdle? Like, what have been your biggest wins, and what can you attribute that to, do you think? I have an idea, but I don't know if it's what you would say.
I can tell you when the UMDF came up with the model of marketing very specific language and materials to businesses, that certainly helped because it was what everybody was able to use, the same language that we were able to present to everybody. And then second, I say is definitely the link to other illnesses. When people start hearing that, they absolutely have more of a connection. And how this might affect them down the road. Oh, research into this is research into diabetes. Oh, well, my aunt and my cousin have diabetes. So to me, it's almost like this overarching umbrella that someday we might all walk together, and that would be a blessing too.
Absolutely. I would say too, talking about connection, people are making connection to that information, Linda, but they're also making connection to you. And I think that like having somebody that's just has the energy to get out there and go and to keep speaking and to keep connecting and to keep putting yourself out there, your story out there, to keep sharing. I think that's a big part of.
And I know I've said this before, but I've said this before, and it just sounds, you might be sick of hearing it, but honestly, to see the growth, to see how far we've come is remarkable. When I say we, I don't mean me. How far we as the world has come. The advances in medical research have just been extraordinary, and we just capitalize on. I mean, I just capitalize on it. I read about it, and then I can speak to it because I've seen how far we've come. People that are diagnosed now, first of all, they can get diagnosed so much easier. There's genetic counseling. And like Dr. Sunita said in his acceptance speech, 2009 was the total game changer when they were able to map the human genome. Everything changed with that. So not just mitochondrial diseases, but all of the other overarching diseases where we could start mapping genes. And then genetic counseling became available. So being able to build off that information and talk about that, and talk about how there's also treatments. There was no Mito cocktail 30 years ago. So being able to talk about these things and say, there is no cure yet, but look how far we've come in 25 short years. Who's to say where we're going to be in 25 more years? That's what's so exciting.
Absolutely. So, Linda, as we wrap up today, tell us a little bit about maybe your most memorable moment, a time when you've been able to share your story that you were like, I am like, that person really got it. Like, that's exciting. Like those kismet stars are all in alignment moment.
I think the highlights came from seeing people being reassured that they were not alone in a support group. I led support groups for many years, and it was an open group, so you didn't have to sign up, and people could come and go each month. But we had a number of people throughout the years that each time a new person, a newly diagnosed person would come to group that month, they sat down and realized, oh my gosh, you have that symptom too? You have that too? Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. And hearing them realize they're not alone, and hearing them know that they're okay and they're going to be okay because, hey, here's what I did, or here's what I did. That was huge. That connection is so powerful for people. Just having other people knowing that they're not alone. And then one time that really stands out was a time in group where an affected adult woman brought her husband and her son. And one of the taglines we kind of use, it was a team name and we quote it a lot. It's called, "But you don't look sick." And that's a problem because there are days that you don't look sick. But then there are days that the disease wreaks havoc on you and you can't get out of bed for days and days. And her family didn't understand that. And they would, think she's lazy or call her terrible names and not be able to understand. And she'd try to explain. But again, there wasn't all the information that was out there that there is now. And they came to group and they saw other affected adults, a dozen other affected adults in the same situation that backed her up and gave their stories and their symptoms and explained how they go through life. And they were just, oh my gosh, they were humbled and thankful, and they had no idea. And that is huge. Again, another just reason why support groups are so important, whether they're virtual or, we can do them virtual now or in person. It's so important to know that you're not alone, and invite your family and have them listen and have them, because that was really powerful for her and her family. They were all crying because it was just this moment of, wow, we believe you now. And
Oh gosh.
so that was huge. Yeah, because they had a hard time believing her. And then, they walk in and I've got information all over the tables. And they're like, oh, this really is a thing. I'm like, yeah, it really is a thing. So that was a big moment, I would have to say.
Life-changing for that person.
Yes.
Absolutely life-changing for that person and their family.
Yes, exactly. So that was a good one.
So gosh, Linda, you've given us so many great reasons and ways to share your story, to raise awareness. And it could be working with your local newspaper or speaking at your local, organizations or churches. It can be connecting with other people over support calls.
Yes.
Because all of these opportunities to share your story, to share your journey, to share Kevin's journey, and to make connection with other people, like that's us working together is that's the ticket, right?
It is. Thanks, Cassie. Thanks for summing it up perfectly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today, Linda. We're getting excited for World Mitochondrial Disease Week, September 16th through the 22nd.
Yes.
We're going to take a really quick break, and then we're going to be talking to another powerhouse today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the Powerhouse podcast. Join us as we take every step toward treatments for mitochondrial diseases. Together, let's energize the fight. Register online at energyforlifewalk.org. Now, back to the Powerhouse. I am super excited to have with us today UMDF Support Ambassador. She's a volunteer for us. She presented at our Mitochondrial Medicine Conference this last summer on the importance of care mapping. She's a Mito mom. She's very involved in advocating for her children's education in addition to their health. And she and her family have shared their story during our holiday giving campaign last winter. So you might be familiar with her, familiar faces. So I'm pleased to have with us today, Nikki Huggin. Nikki, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about your family's connection to mitochondrial disease?
Well, I have two children. My son, Gavin, and my daughter, Hayden, they both have suspected mitochondrial disease. My son has one gene that's a variant of unknown significance at this point. And it's been a roller coaster of a ride getting here. He's 12 and he was diagnosed at 3. And we still honestly don't have a completely definitive diagnosis of what gene it is that's disease causing for either child.
But they're both medically complicated following their health journey, and it's tough, right?
Yes, they are both medically complicated. My son is much more complicated than my daughter. He recently, this past March, his stomach just decided it's on strike. It's no longer going to work. So he's completely GJ tube dependent at this point. And it's really rocked our world. He's requires 12-hour day nursing now, and we can't really take him very many places. His fatigue is much worse than it ever has been. It's definitely a change for our family.
So I've been following your journey. You share a lot of just your family's story, Gavin's journey on social media. But I've also been really very interested to watch your journey and your leadership story in Families to the Max in Pennsylvania. So I was hoping you'd share with us a little bit more about that today.
So I was very blessed to come in contact with some people who were already a part of Families to the Max, which is the Pennsylvania statewide family network. It works directly in conjunction with Patton, Peel, and Hune, who are all players in the educational field in Pennsylvania, and also the Bureau of Special Education. So it's run through a federal grant, and it's an amazing group of families that come together and help find resources for other families, help families navigate. And I'm actually the vice chair of the Regional Family Leaders Council. So I get to do a lot of work. I get to present, which I really love to do. It gives me an opportunity to tell my story of my family and our journey. But I also get to help families, find ways to help themselves, which is really important to me.
So this, I don't know that people think about these types of connections and this type of, it's really like, it's work that you're doing. Like it's an extra job that you're doing, as raising awareness for, the entire mitochondrial disease community. And you're sort of, even though it's helping you and it's helping other families kind of figure out the educational system and accommodations for their kids, you're also raising a level of awareness about mitochondrial disease. People might not have ever heard of it before, and you're really kind of paving the way too for other mito families in Pennsylvania. And I'm not sure that people think of it that way. Like it's something that you're doing that's amazing and like that's necessary and that's helping Gavin and Hayden, but like how much you're likely helping other mito families in Pennsylvania, other families of medically complicated children.
So I tend not to think about it that way until somebody says it. But I honestly, this volunteer work it makes me feel whole, because I feel like when I look at my own struggles that I've had, I don't want other families to go through those same struggles. And I know there are people before me who felt the same way, who have helped me in so many ways. This network that spans across Pennsylvania helps bring families of medically complex children and any child with an IEP, but medically complex children are so different, because when we're sending them to school, we're sending them with like almost a multitude of needs that is well beyond your typical child with an IEP. I mean, I'm going to send my son to school with a nurse. He's going to have all of his meds given there, and there's like, I don't know, 20 plus meds. That's not a normal conversation that a school has. So it's important to me that we work with families to help them understand how to navigate these pieces. Because listen, I just said this to my husband last night. Nobody said it was going to be this hard, right? Nobody said like you're going to have a kid and they're going to be just a little bit different. And I mean, I think we all know with Mito, it's a little more than a little bit different, but we never thought we would be navigating medical things. Neither one of us are inclined in this way, that we understand all of the medical jargon. I'm constantly Googling things. But as for the work across PA, there are a lot of Mito families in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of Mito families across the United States. But here in Pennsylvania, we are lucky enough to have a statewide family network. I believe it's the only one of its kind in the United States. And I hope that it becomes a model for other states, so that they can see how consistent and how helpful it makes things for families, especially those of medically complex children.
I think that's so important. I want to say, I know that I live and work from Texas remotely for UMDF. We do have a family network in Texas, and I think we have one I think there's one in Oklahoma. I want to encourage people. I mean, as you're saying, Nikki, it is so hard. Like, you don't, they don't make it easy. That's for sure. Like, my kiddo has ADHD. He has an IEP. He doesn't have, like you said, all of the medical accommodations that Gavin and Hayden might have. So, I mean, even just the IEP is complicated. But all of these other things, like you said, are so difficult to navigate. Look and research your family network opportunities in your state. Like, I feel like these things are out there, and they're ways for you to get help, get support, get engaged, share your story, and really improve things for your family, for other families, for other Mito families. I'm so impressed by your leadership in Families to the Max. And tell us a little bit about how sharing your story, sharing Gavin's story, Hayden's story is so important.
So I think, like, to answer this, I have to like go back, right? So in 2015, I didn't even know what mitochondrial disease was. And that wasn't even a decade ago, right? Like, that was only 9 years ago.
Yeah.
I had no concept at all. And when I sat in a doctor's office and they said, we think that your son either has CP or mitochondrial disease, it's in our family story. It's in our family story from the mailer. Like, I sat there and said, he must have CP because I don't know what that other thing is. And and honestly, I sometimes think back to that prior to 2015, I didn't even know what mitochondrial disease was. And I had no concept that it was going to change my entire life, that it would ingrain itself in my everyday, that especially right now with Gavin's symptoms being so enhanced, I can't even think about planning anything because my life revolves around mitochondrial disease. It revolves around his needs in this particular day. And I never know what that day is going to look like. So this work, this sharing of our story in any place that we can help families understand. Okay, first, I want people to understand so that they understand my children, because when you're 12, you should be out running around. When you're 9, you should be playing with your friends. And my children some days cannot do that. And I know that there's thousands and thousands of other children who are in the same situation. And I want their friends and their friends' parents to understand why, to understand that they can't do it because of mitochondrial disease, not because they don't want to, or they're lazy, or they don't want to get up. This is a type of fatigue that you can't even put into words.
Right.
And I want the parent that's sitting there who's just heard of mitochondrial disease to know that they're not alone. I want everybody who's in my children's lives to understand that this is like an all-encompassing diagnosis. This is not just, oh, well, there's a treatment and a cure and everything will be fine. There isn't. And we're treating symptoms. And I think that that's really important for people to understand, because they hear about diseases that have a cure. I think we all grew up thinking like there's some magic pill that fixes everything, and there really isn't. So telling our story and putting that information out there, I want it to help as many people as possible. And I want educators, and when I speak with Families to the Max, to understand when that parent, whether the child has mitochondrial disease or another health condition, is sitting in front of you, there is so much emotion, there's so much trauma, there's so much everything that maybe they're not showing you, or they're showing you in a way because that's how they're dealing with it in that moment. I can tell you that my particular IEP team, I have gone from crying to like yelling and going back and forth, and I tend not to yell. I try to compromise, but still sometimes you just get frustrated, right? I mean, they have been with me, they work with me, they help Gavin. In fact, I was in a meeting yesterday where I was just like, they're really doing everything they can for him. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's a couch in a room they're going to let him lay on. I mean, like, he's getting what he needs where he needs it because of the fact that I'm educating them on his needs. And I think parents need to learn how to do that. And I know it's a very long-winded way for me to get to that, but it's all, I want all of those types of people to understand what's happening and spread that mitochondrial diseases is there. It's not, it's not some, it shouldn't be a disease that no one's ever heard of. It should be a disease that people know about, understand, and realize. And when I talk to people and say, do you know someone with diabetes? Do you know someone with Parkinson's? Do you know someone with Alzheimer's? Like, these are all forms of mitochondria not working. These are all, you know, I show them the graphic that has all the different things that, you know, deal with mitochondria. So it's, I hope that I'm making a difference and teaching people that about mitochondrial disease and about the emotions and the family needs that are there because of it.
I know that you are. I would love to hear about any of those like memorable, like, you know, those moments when you've shared a story where you just feel like, oh, they get it, like, and or there's a connection that's made, or somebody says, oh, you know, I have somebody in my family that has you know, like, tell me about anything like that might have happened.
So recently I was able to travel to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and speak with Families to the Max with the chair, Jill Housel, and one of the partners, Jackie DiDomenico, and I. We were able to present actually with the director of the Bureau of Special Education. It was really important to us. And during that presentation, we talked about conflict resolution at the lowest level. And one of the things that we wanted to touch on was our family story in education. And I told Gavin's story about how when he was going into kindergarten, they wanted to put him into a separated classroom with fewer children. And I said, no, I want him in general education. And I didn't know why at the time, but I knew what Gavin needed. And when Gavin was in the hospital in March, I'm really going to get a little upset here. Sorry. He was in the hospital for 5 weeks, and his classmates, in fact, the entire school building and other schools within the district, sent him cards, and he had hundreds and hundreds of cards, and I hung them all on the walls at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And doctors who weren't even his doctor and nurses who weren't even his nurses were coming in to see these cards because he had so many cards hanging. And everyone was so in awe of the amount of support that he had. And when I said that during this presentation, I said, I know that amount of support and all of that love that he felt is a direct reflection on a decision that I made that I didn't know if I was making the right decision. I made a decision for him to be in a gen ed kindergarten class. And if I hadn't, this wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have all of the support and love that he has from the community. And this entire community in in the Slate Belt of Pennsylvania rallies behind him any chance that they get. It's an amazing community that we live in. But when I finished speaking, I had a few parents who were there and a few educators that are from this area, and they came over to me and they were like, this is exactly why inclusion is important. This is exactly why, even if there's a medical issue, we need to try. And I feel like maybe, just maybe, that Gavin's story will get more children who have mitochondrial disease or other health conditions into gen ed classrooms with less of an argument about placement. And that's my hope. I really hope that there's another family out there who will have an easier time because I got to tell Gavin's story.
That's the hope. That's the hope. And I think that you're spreading it. And we appreciate all the work that you do. Now I'm getting emotional. Sorry. So I just appreciate you coming on the Powerhouse today. Appreciate all the work that you're doing, your vulnerability and sharing your story with so many people. I think it's so important. Your wonderful community that you live in that supports you and understands that Gavin and Hayden have suspected mitochondrial disease, and that and just share all the love that they can and support that they can with your family. So just a message out to everyone. United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, we have support ambassadors like Nikki, who have just a fantastic understanding about the educational system, educational accommodations, IEPs. Like they've gone through it. They've been through it. They're going through it. They're leaders, and they're willing to help. And Nikki, I just thank you so much for all that you do and all that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I do want to say one more thing to you, and that's, I hope that anybody who might just have come across this podcast in looking for mitochondrial disease says to themselves, I'm going to call. If there's anything I can say about UMDF, it's that since the minute that I found them in 2015, they have been like a rock for my family. I can't say enough about how much UMDF has helped support us emotionally through all of the pieces and given us resources to get what we need or where we need to be.
Gosh, thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you. What an episode. It's really been an honor to put together this panel of Mito moms and get to spend time with each one of them. Join us in sharing your Mito story during World Mitochondrial Disease Week, September 16th through the 22nd. You can find social media shareables on our website and across our social media channels. Please like and share and raise your voice. As for the Powerhouse, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.